She's been going every week, ever since. And I don't remember how long ago that was. It had to be 2012 or 2013. And she's...
I felt like it was around the time from all stuff started. So that would, yeah, probably 2012.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering how she's been doing.
But I think that's really something that she does that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm going to go check in with Michelle again.
All right, tell him. I'm sorry that I'm ignoring him. I'm a little busy. I'm struggling here a little bit. This will make me unhappy.
Oh.
Jerry's not. Yes.
Oh, okay. Do you think it's likely that they will testify yet this March?
I think it's possible.
I'm convinced that it'll be this afternoon, and I told them, well, don't be convinced, because
I don't know.
we have a lot to do.
If you don't answer that for us, I don't know.
I'm sorry, I was scared.
You're fine. I just...
You're fine. Thanks. I won't go back down on my feet. Have it here. My face right there. Too hard. It's all hard.
Read again.
Yeah, all the way down there is just fine. Where you're just fine.
Thank you.
Good morning, Terry.
Good morning.
Been back there?
He is. He's, be with us shortly, I believe. I've got it. Back there, 240.
Like, I'm gonna keep getting your powder remote, because Bruce's.
I think no, other than just to go and show our faces and see if she has any, talk to us about what do you think? Want to do that? Hold on a second.
Yeah, give me a second.
Do you want Daryl and Michelle and Dr. Wyman yet?
Yes.
Everyone rise, please. Here. Second Court of the 14th Judicial Circuit, State of Illinois, in and for the County of Whiteside is now in session. The Honorable Trish Senna, judge presiding.
Thank you. You may be seated. This is People of the State of Illinois versus Anna Schroeder, 18 CF 191. State is present by State's Attorney Terry Costello. The defendant appears in the courtroom in person and with attorneys James Murtis and Christina Buskal. This is a continuation of a sentencing hearing that was begun on Wednesday of this week. We ended with Mr. Costello's presentation. Mr. Murtis, do you wish to present any evidence at this time?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, you may call your first witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. This time the defense calls Dr. Stephen M. Wine, W-E-I-N-E.
All right, Dr. Wine, please approach the clerk and be sworn. I will also advise everyone that, as we did last Wednesday, witnesses, once they are on the stand, are free to remove their masks if they feel comfortable. In addition, the attorneys who are questioning the witness are free to remove their masks when they're doing so, if they feel comfortable.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Yes.
Please have a seat up here, sir. Watch your step on the way up. Please speak into the microphone, and again, if you feel comfortable, you may remove your mask. Understand, everyone, that we have a court reporter who's taking down everything that's said, so please try to speak not too quickly and audibly so that she can take everything down correctly. You may begin, Mr. Murtis.
Thank you, Your Honor. Please state your name, sir.
Stephen Wine.
Dr. Wine, you are the psychiatrist who examined Anna Schroeder in this case, is that correct?
Yes.
Could you please describe your educational background for the court?
Okay, I have a bachelor's degree from the University of Michigan. I went to medical school at Columbia University in New York. I did my psychiatry residency at Yale University.
And in fact, when did you complete your psychiatry residency at Yale University?
About 1991.
Are you licensed as a psychiatrist in the state of Illinois?
I'm licensed as a physician, and I'm also board certified as a psychiatrist.
When did you become licensed as a physician in the state of Illinois?
When I moved to Illinois, which was 1995.
And when did you become board certified in the field of psychiatry?
I believe in 1993.
Are you employed as a psychiatrist?
Yes.
Where are you so employed?
I am a professor at the University of Illinois College of Medicine.
And how long have you been so employed?
I've been there since 1995.
Do you have any experience, Dr. Wine, in the evaluation of the psychiatric condition of persons who are involved in violent offenses?
Yes, I do.
Describe, if you will, that experience.
One, I've been involved in several criminal cases, doing forensic assessment of those cases, including cases related to terrorism. I'm also an expert in the area of violence prevention and threat assessment. and have done academic work, training, expert consultation in the United States and internationally, working with law enforcement agencies and governments.
Describe, if you will, with more specificity, your work in the assessment of individuals for purposes of violence prevention.
Well, there are persons who have been maybe involved in a violent event, or they have come close to committing a violent event, and so I've been involved in doing assessments of those persons to understand what kind of risk they may or may not continue to pose, what factors, cause that risk, what factors protect against it, and what kinds of measures should be put in place to protect the public or that person. So that's especially with regards to people who've been involved in ideologically motivated violence like terrorism, or or non-ideologically motivated targeted violence.
Dr. Wine, have you, in that regard, been involved in the evaluation of individuals who are reported or alleged to have been involved in acts, for instances, of international terrorism?
Yes.
And what has that been comprised of generally?
Well, there are persons who were, say, involved with a foreign terrorist organization like the Islamic State, and have been involved in that organization, or been to Syria and committed acts of violence, and now are being back in this country or another country. And the question is, are they safe or not? Do they pose a threat to the public or not? So I've been involved in working with security agencies, law enforcement, to try to help that in countries like the country of Kazakhstan, for example, where I was just a few weeks ago, but it's also an issue here at home. And then there's other kinds of people who maybe haven't committed an act yet, but they've been involved in, say, online communities where extremist ideas are discussed. They have expressed the idea of doing something, and their life is kind of a mess. And the question is, are there things that we could do to help them to not continue down that pathway and to settle down into normal, peaceful life? And so I'm involved with lots of other stakeholders in the state of Illinois and in other places to try to provide those kinds of persons with the resources they need so they don't go ahead and commit a crime.
Now, generally, how do you go about the process of a psychiatric threat assessment of an individual about whom there are concerns about?
Well, I think the first thing to say is it's not just, I don't want to say it's strictly psychiatric. There are all kinds of people professionals who approach this issue of threat assessment, not just from a psychiatric lens. I think the issues are, does the person have the intention, the will, and the capability to commit a violent act? And so there are a series of kind of questions that you can ask a person to try to understand that. I think what we also know is that persons tend to not just do things like that out of the blue. People are often on what's referred to as a pathway of communication and action that happens before any violent event. So that involves things like they have the idea, they have a grievance, they start to plan, oh, maybe I'll do this, maybe I'll do that. Then they make preparation to actually do something, and then they implement it. So when you're doing these kinds of assessments, you're always asking, where is this person on this pathway?
Dr. Wine, have you been qualified as an expert witness in the field of psychiatric evaluation of individuals, including but not limited to the threat assessment of individuals.
Yes.
Have you been qualified by the state courts of the state of Illinois as an expert witness on prior occasions in those areas?
Yes.
And in fact, have you, sir, testified as an expert witness before the United States Congress?
Yes.
Dr. Wine, do you have a curriculum vitae that sets forth with greater specificity your educational, occupational, and research background?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, may I approach the witness?
You may.
Counsel, defendant side. Dr. Wine, I've now handed you an exhibit which I have caused to be marked. Defendant's Exhibit 5. Do you recognize that, sir?
Yes.
What do you recognize it to be?
It's my CV.
And is this curriculum vitae, is it accurately set forth your educational, occupational, and experience background?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, defense moves admission into evidence of Defendant's Exhibit 5.
Mr. Costello?
I don't have any objection to that.
Defendant's Exhibit number 5 will be admitted without objection.
At this time, the defense requests that the witness be qualified as an expert in the psychiatric evaluation of the mental health condition of persons, including the psychiatric evaluation and risk assessment.
Mr. Costello?
I'd request permission to voir dire the witness, Your Honor.
You may do so.
Thank you. Dr. Wine, your curriculum vitae is 36 pages long? Is that fair to say?
Yes.
And I'm assuming in 36 pages you've covered the vast majority of what you've done in your career?
Yes.
Okay. Isn't it fair to say that the vast majority of your career has been dealing with refugee issues from war-torn countries, with terrorism in foreign nations, with genocide and things of that nature?
That is my academic career in some respects. I'm an expert in the area of refugee mental health, or you might say global mental health, and so I've written a lot of papers on that and developed and evaluated programs in that area. But I'm here today, just to clarify, because I also have an independent forensic practice, which is outside of my academic career, for which I do things like routine forensic psychiatry, personal injury, child custody, criminal cases, which are not anything related to terrorism. And I've also been involved as a clinician, treating adolescents and adults who are, just ordinary people in the U.S.
So what percentage of your career is devoted to the things you just talked about, providing psychiatric treatment as a clinician?
At the present time, I'm not involved in doing direct clinical work, but I've done, because I've been focusing more on research, and I have an administrative position at the university, but I have done many years of clinical work in multiple different settings in the places I've lived, Connecticut and New York and Illinois, and currently I do the kind of forensic work that I described as, I don't know, it's something like 5% of my total time.
Okay, so when was the last time you did any clinical work?
That I haven't been a frontline clinician for probably 15 years, but I have done, but I do clinically related research, so I'm involved in developing and evaluating and implementing clinical interventions, for example, for refugees from Syria.
Okay, so
I'm not the person, just to clarify, I'm sorry, I'm not the, in those cases, I'm not the the doc who sits in front of the person and writes the scripts, but I have designed the whole program of treatment that the person's getting, and I'm standing back, kind of overseeing it and making adjustments.
So the vast majority of your work then is the programming that involves, again, refugees, genocide, terrorism, assessments regarding terrorism and genocide, and people that may be heading down that path, correct?
I'm not sure that's how I would characterize it, but I mean, certainly that's been a part of my work, but I, through my forensic practice, I interview all the time people who are first responders, police and firefighters, ordinary moms and dads and kids who are going through divorce or other kinds of hard times, other people who've been involved in car accidents or train accidents or gotten bitten by a dog, things like that.
Okay, so you're doing that more as a researcher, though, not as a clinician that's providing service, correct?
No, the latter part of what I just described is not research, that's forensic work, so where I'm being an expert witness for the court. So for example, literally, someone was bit by a dog pretty bad, and they're alleging that because of that they have depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder. And so I'm asked to evaluate that person and to render an opinion for the court because there's some civil litigation, or something similar like a car accident, which is the most common cause of post-traumatic stress disorder in the United States and the thing that we see very often, or a police or firefighter who is involved in a critical incident like a shooting or a fire and has problems as a result of that. So those are the kinds of things I do routinely too. But I don't write academic papers on that. You're looking at my academic CV, which reflects all the things that I have written papers about. The other stuff is just the work that I do.
Okay, but that's the CV you provided to Mr. Murtis, correct?
Well, I have an academic CV, but I don't have a CV in which I list all of the personal injury cases that I've done. But I can describe those for you in more detail. I have a list of all the depositions and testimonies I've done, if that would be helpful.
Okay, and I'm not trying to argue with you, I'm just circling back. This is the CV you provided to Mr. Murtis, right?
Of course.
Okay. And you said you've got a position with the University of Illinois. The University of Illinois has campuses all over the state, as you're well aware. You're associated with the med school in Chicago, is that correct?
Correct. The University of Illinois College of Medicine I'm part of that in the Department of Psychiatry and the Center for Global Health. And I'm based in Chicago, and our medical school has campuses also in other locations.
Okay. I have no other questions, thank you.
Mr. Murtis?
Dr. Wine, the curriculum vitae that you prepared sets forth your educational and occupational background, correct?
Yes.
It does not set forth every case in which you've been involved as an expert or forensic evaluator of individuals, correct?
Correct.
In fact, it's a resume as opposed to a description of your daily functioning in a job.
Correct.
Would that be an accurate characterization?
Yes.
Incidentally, is there any nexus between the evaluation of a potential international terrorist and the evaluation of an individual who is charged with or convicted of homicide, in terms of the academic principles, the medical and psychiatric principles involved in that evaluation?
I'd say there's a tremendous overlap. So, for example, I described earlier the approach to threat assessment, or trying to understand how it is that this person got in this position where they either could or did commit some act. I think that those factors are those processes of of looking at that are largely the same. The biggest difference that we get into with persons involved in terrorism is they're involved in some kind of ideology or some kind of, organization, which impacts their decision-making and their choices. But that's not the only thing we look at. We look at all the other things, their life history, their cognitive capacity, their behavioral and mental health functioning, their relationships, all kinds of things. So I'd say that's very similar. And then I'd say we also, as a psychiatrist, as a mental health professional, we try to assess, does this person have any kind of mental health disorder? Do they have some mental health disorder or other behavioral problem that is driving their behavior and could possibly explain why they did or didn't do something? It may not explain everything, but it may be an important factor to consider, either as a cause or if you're thinking about what's the remedy for this. So, we do what we call a mental status examination, an intensive interview of somebody where we try to characterize whether they have such a disorder. And I think that's something that's generic, that cuts across all these kinds of different cases.
Would it be correct to say then that in the threat assessment of an international terrorist or the threat assessment of an individual convicted of familial homicide, the stakes are high?
Of course, for the individual and for the public.
And your career has involved extensive experience in doing that.
Yes.
Your Honor, pending before you is our request that Dr. Wine be deemed qualified as an expert witness in the areas identified by him. I renew that request at this time.
Any additional questioning, Mr. Costello?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
All right, thank you. He will be so qualified. You may continue.
Doctor, at this time I'd like to discuss more specifically the medical principles involved with the development of the child. Could you describe for the court, please, the differing systems and components of a child's brain in adolescent development?
Okay. So the issue is that an adolescent is not just a small adult. And through the field of neuroscience, we have learned a lot about what's going on in their brain that can explain the behavior that everybody knows. Here's what everybody knows. Adolescents take risks. And adolescents are very influenced by peers. And adolescents at times show really poor judgment and decision making. So it turns out that there's what we call the imbalance model of brain development. Imbalance between two different brain systems. One of those brain systems we call the prefrontal cortex. And that's the part of the brain that's involved in reasoning, in decision making, in what we call executive functioning. It's the organizer of the brain. And then there's another part of the brain called the limbic system. And that's involved more in emotion, in motivation, and in risk-taking. And actually, that part of the brain gets excited when, and it rewards the person for taking risks. So what's going on in adolescence is that the prefrontal cortex, that reasoning, organizing part of the brain, is not developed. But the limbic system is. So the limbic system is disproportionately in control during adolescence. And we see this in terms of, what I said before, impulsivity, risk-taking, poor decision-making. In fact, people have done some very interesting experiments where they showed that an adolescent will take, more risks than adults, and in the presence of a peer, they'll take even more risks because an adolescent fears the rejection of their peer. And so, for all of these reasons, and on the basis of this scientific evidence, courts of law have taken this into consideration and said, hey, we should not look at crimes committed during adolescence the same way as crimes committed during adulthood.
And for purposes of the record, what is the age range that you are referring to when we refer to the term adolescence?
Well, I would say between like 12 and 20, 21, something like that.
And for the benefit of our court reporter, could you spell the word limbic?
Limbic.
Dr. Wine, with that backdrop, I'd like to now discuss with you your evaluation of the defendant, Anna Schroeder. Is it correct that you conducted an examination or evaluation of Anna Schroeder in connection with this case?
Yes,
Before you conducted that examination of her personally, did you have an opportunity to review certain documents and materials that were provided to you to assist and complement your evaluation?
yes.
Generally, what did those materials consist of?
There were a lot of materials. So there were materials related to, at the time, her day-to-day experience in the detention center. There was a lot of medical records because she had been involved in mental health treatment since she was, I think, 5 years old. So there were tons of records from multiple institutions and multiple treaters that she had crossed paths with. There were educational records from the schools that she'd been in. And there was records related to the crime that at that point she was accused of. And for example, interviews and I guess investigations done by detectives, things like that.
In connection with your review of materials associated with her prior mental health treatment, did you have occasion to review materials that involved an assessment of issues such as IQ, working memory, and processing speed?
Yes,
Now let's break down those concepts. First of all, we all understand what IQ means. IQ is an assessment of intelligence, correct?
correct.
Was Anna's IQ tested?
Yes.
Now, when was that?
I believe, was that like 2015, I believe? I could check my notes if you like.
Okay, doctor, I'm now performing a memory test of a psychiatrist.
Yes, that's right.
Doctor, what is your understanding of the determination of Anna's IQ when it was in fact assessed?
Her IQ was, if I recall, 98, which was 45th percentile.
What does that mean, 45th percentile?
That means, that she's kind of in the middle. If you looked at the general population, 55% of people have a higher IQ, 45% of people have a lower IQ.
Now, in connection with that same assessment, was Anna's working memory assessed?
Yes.
And what does that concept mean, working memory? What does that mean?
Working memory, refers to the ability of the brain to hold in awareness immediately what it needs to function. So it's a very, very important concept for, say, interpersonal communication, because I have to remember the question you asked me a minute ago, or it would be very important in learning. So people who have lower working memory have challenges holding in their awareness all the things that they need to do to have good interpersonal interactions.
And what was Anna Schroeder's working memory determined to be?
It was I think it around 21 percentile, if I recall correctly, so that was lower than, say, the IQ. That means she's in the bottom fifth of the population and below average,
Now let's talk about
significantly below average.
Now let's talk about the term processing speed. What does that mean?
Processing speed, just kind of like it sounds, refers to the brain's ability to handle information, I guess the pace with which the brain could do that. So people who have compromised processing speed, they just can't think so fast. And so, again, especially in interpersonal or complex, find themselves having a hard time staying caught up with what's going on around them, which can interfere in their ability to act, to make judgments, to make decisions, to respond appropriately.
In the evaluation of Anna Schroeder, what was the determination or assessment of her processing speed in terms of percentile?
I believe it was 28%, so similar to where the working memory is.
Now, in addition to your review of those prior assessments or evaluations of Anna Schroeder,
Yes.
of the mental health treatment that Anna received over the course of that decade?
Okay. Well, I would say overall it was really inadequate and fragmented and, below the standard of care, below what anybody would want for their loved one. Anna was seen at many different institutions. I forgot how many, but she was between a number of different hospital systems and public outpatient clinics. She had many different clinicians. She had pediatricians and social workers and counselors and some psychologists and psychiatrists, but she had really a lack of comprehensive expert assessment. Here's what we want for somebody, that somebody sits down with them for an hour or two and really goes through everything and comes up with a comprehensive formulation of the person, their strengths, their weaknesses, what they need, and not just kind of knee-jerk reaction, what meds can I prescribe today? So I think that she got too much of that, and not enough of the really good care. And I think this mattered because she has a number of issues that she's been struggling with, and so her case is not a straightforward case that you could just give someone medication, Ritalin for attention deficit disorder, and problem solved. You'll never need to worry again. She had a complex and challenging case, so she needed that higher level of care. She needed that higher level of expertise. Unfortunately, she didn't receive it.
What were the various conditions from which she suffered? In other words, what were the components of the complex case that was the child, Anna Schroeder?
Mm-hmm. Well, she was diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, with depression, with anxiety. She also had persistent problems with what we call self-mutilation, meaning she would cut herself repeatedly. She had problems with suicidality. And she had what I would call insecure attachment. She was the kind of person who was really afraid of losing people, really afraid of abandonment by her friends, by her loved ones, and this colored everyday experience. She also had learning problems and was on an IEP for most of the years of her education, and she was homeschooled for 1 year. I would also just add that there are some other kind of life circumstances we should keep in mind about Anna. She was exposed to early childhood neglect. She was adopted at age 2, and then the family into which she was adopted was going through a high-intensity conflict divorce, and she was exposed to a lot of conflict because of that. And we know that all of this exposure to early childhood adversity really primes the person for problems in adolescence, which I think were well manifested.
Let's break that down a little bit. At the age of just 22 months, the infant or toddler, Anna, was removed from the home of her biological mother. Is that correct?
Yes.
And it's your understanding from review of records and your examination that was as a result of severe or extreme neglect in that home, correct?
Yes.
That is ultimately how she came into the care of her mother, Peggy, and her father, Daryl Schroeder. True?
Yes.
What is the role or interplay of that piece in the composition of the child, Anna Schroeder? The fact that she came originally from a home in infancy that was characterized by extreme neglect.
Right. Well, those kinds of experiences, I mean, you might think, oh, well, they happen when they're so young, the child will just forget about them, but that's not true. Or maybe they will not actually remember those experiences, but those experiences get imprinted in the brain and profoundly affect brain and development and a person's capacities for relation. They increase a person's likelihood of developing mental health problems, substance abuse, other kinds of health problems. So we know a lot about that from research these days, which shows that, the persons who experience that kind of adversity, neglect, exposure to intense conflict, are, on a different kind of life trajectory because of that.
And does that inform the development then of this concept that you described as insecure attachment or the intense fear of abandonment? Is that one of the factors that goes into ultimately the formation of that disorder?
Yes.
How so?
How so? Well, I don't know that we really know how so, but the capacity to have secure attachments is one of the most important capacities of human beings that allows us to have friends and healthy relationships. If I know that I can trust you, that I can rely upon you, and that, say, if you turn and talk to the guard behind you, that I don't worry that you're immediately plotting against me and doing something, and then I need to act because I'm worried, So if a person is on a path of insecure attachments, or let's think of a child especially, then their day is filled with a sense of, or moments of a sense of dread and terror that the bottom could drop out at any moment. That, if mommy turns away or leaves, I'm on my own. And so we know that this can be a real burden to bring to relationships. It's not good to bring to, say you're a teenager and you have a boyfriend or a girlfriend. It leads to a lot of instability, a lot of conflict, and some of the kinds of things that we've seen from Anna, self-mutilation, because she and other persons in this kind of space are so bothered by a really high level of angst, of pain, that they just don't know what to do with themselves.
How does self-mutilation manifest itself? What causes self-mutilation in an individual like Anna Schroeder?
So again, the brain is such a complex organ, and there's only so many things we know from our research. So we don't know exactly how to explain how these things happen, but we know that certain things, certain patterns are true. So there are persons who've been, a lot of people who've been exposed to some kind of neglect or abuse develop a habit in childhood and adolescence of cutting themselves or burning themselves. And what they, and Anna actually described it to me very well. She said, I like to cut myself. She said, when I'm upset, I feel like I have control over my feelings. I have control over my life when I do that. So literally a person will sit there with a razor blade and cut, not with the intent of severing an artery and ending their lives, but the intent of watching themselves bleed and feeling some pain. Somehow it takes them out of their mind, and they could focus on the physical phenomenon in front of them. And it becomes a kind of ritual that people do day in and day out. And I think that's the space that Anna got into for many, many years. And it was worrisome to those around her when they found out about it. Because another thing that people do is they tend to sometimes go deeper and deeper and deeper when they feel more and more pain. And so they can get very close to severing an artery, and it becomes a life-threatening circumstance then.
So the act of self-mutilation represents for that individual a distraction from the intense pain in that person's mind to a focus on the intense physical pain in that person's arm or hand.
Yes, it's a kind of perverse self-medication for inner pain.
For how long had Anna been self-mutilated before this?
For years. But it also escalated in the month or so prior to this event.
Now let's as we're progressing toward this event and developing a better understanding of what, let's talk a little further about the mental health care that she received. Did Anna receive care from the age of 5 to the age of 14 from 18 different medical and mental health providers?
Yes.
Did Anna receive various psychiatric medications from those 18 different medical and mental health providers over the course of that decade?
Yes.
And what are some of the medications that were prescribed to her during the course of that decade?
Almost all the ones we have. You know, she was prescribed multiple medications for ADHD. That would be like stimulant medications, like Ritalin and variations of those. She was prescribed anti-anxiety medications like Ativan, which is a sedative hypnotic. She was prescribed multiple antidepressant medications, such as Zoloft and Wellbutrin. And she was prescribed antipsychotic medications, such as Risperidol.
Given the multitude of different providers and the various medications and the various doses, did you formulate a concern with respect to the disjointed care she received?
Yes.
And what's the problem with that, Dr. Wine? In its essence, what's the problem with 18 different medical and mental health providers prescribing no less than 10 different psychotropic medications to a mentally unwell person over the course of a decade. What's the problem with the lack of coordinated care?
Well, there's multiple problems. It's very frustrating to me. I think there's a lack of continuity, so that, you know, the providers become another set of people who come and go in her life, and hard to establish trusting relationships with them. There's a, I guess, disjointed approach to problem solving. As I said before, Anna is a complex case, so this is not the situation where there's one obvious solution, you implement it, and we're done. It's going to always be the case where we're going to have to try different things and make small adjustments and wait patiently to see what develops. And if you bring in a new cast of characters every time, then everyone thinks they have the answer and just plops down another solution, and you're not really understanding the context and the nature of the problem. So I just think you get a lot of short-sighted solutions, you know, that don't add up to much. A lot of kind of knee-jerk reaction as treatment. That's not the kind of treatment that we want for our patients, for our loved ones. We want, we want treatment that's based upon a really good formulation of the whole child and the whole family. We want continuity over time. And we want to balance the use of medications with the use of individual counseling, family therapy, appropriate school interventions. We don't want to over-rely on medications just because we have them.
From a mental health perspective, in the year leading up to this tragedy, were things getting better for Anna?
No.
In fact, you described that her self-mutilation was worsened, correct?
It worsened, yes. And there was also concern about suicidality.
In fact, at some point in time, in approximately 2017, did Anna receive a prescription for Zoloft?
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about Zoloft. What is it?
Zoloft is an SSRI, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, antidepressant. It's a very commonly used antidepressant medication. And Anna was prescribed that in about, I think, May or June of 2017.
Now, to be clear, Dr. Wine, you're not critical as a general proposition of Zoloft, right?
No, Zoloft is an approved medication. People prescribe Zoloft all the time. It's used very effectively and safely, but it is unique, and there are some concerns about Zoloft.
Are there even some greater concerns when it comes to the administration of Zoloft to an adolescent?
Yes.
Does Zoloft come with an FDA black box warning?
Yes.
What is a black box warning? What does that mean?
Well, that means, like, literally on the label of the medication, there's a black box with some heavy words in there saying, be careful when using this medication. You should be aware that there have been some reports of problems, and so the clinician who prescribes the medication is supposed to talk about that with the patient or with their family so that they're aware of that. It doesn't mean not to use it, but it means use it with caution and care.
Dr. Wine, every medication on the face of the planet has 10,000 warnings of concerns and interactions, drug interactions, side effects, all of that. We understand that. Is there something different or unique about a black box warning from all of those warnings that we're accustomed to seeing on things as simple as asking or turn off?
There is, and it is at a higher level of concern. And I think the reason for that in this case is because people are concerned that it can drive violent behavior, violent suicidal or homicidal behavior.
From a mental health perspective, is there a significant distinction between suicidality and homicidality?
Well, there are of course different things, different outcomes, but they're both violent aggression towards the self, or violent aggression towards someone else. And there's lots of research that shows that there's can be a relation between those things. And of course, we know of very tragic events where people have killed others and then killed themselves. So they're intermingled.
Let's talk about the black box warning. This is defendant 6, counsel.
Here, the witness would like some water.
Is there water?
Do you want to take a break?
I don't have anything.
Okay.
Do you want to take a break?
Sure.
Okay. Folks, we're going to take a short break right now, and we'll be back in about 3 or 4 minutes. Thank you. Sir, you're still under oath. Please don't discuss your testimony with anybody.
Okay, thanks.
Yes. Okay, sorry. I'll do it.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
You are welcome.
You got me one.
All right.
I'm good, thanks.
I'm going to steal this.
You remain seated. Court is back in session.
Are you okay now?
Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, Mr. Murdish, you may resume.
Thank you, Your Honor. May I approach the witness?
You may.
Dr. Wine, I've now handed you an exhibit which I've identified as Defense Exhibit 6 to this proceeding. Do you recognize that, sir?
Yes,
What do you recognize it to be?
it's the FDA black box warning for Zoloft.
And this is the black box warning of which you spoke prior to our recess.
Yes,
At this time, I move admission into evidence of Defense Exhibit 6.
Any objection, Mr. Costello?
No objection.
Defendant's number 6 will be admitted without objection.
May I publish that exhibit so that the court can see it contemporaneous with the testimony?
You may do so.
Thank you. Dr. Wine, is this in fact the black box warning for Zoloft that was prescribed to Anna Schroeder?
yes,
And it indicates that Zoloft and other antidepressant medicines may increase suicidal thoughts or actions in some people 24 years of age and younger, especially within the first few months of treatment or when the dose is changed, correct?
yes,
Now, pursuant to FDA guidelines, because of the magnitude and importance of a black box warning, is the clinician required to actually discuss this with the patient, or in the case of a child, the patient and the patient's parent?
yes.
And what is the significance of the concern of Zoloft actually increasing suicidal thoughts or actions in an adolescent or a person 24 years of age or younger?
We don't want to lose them. And so, an adolescent, again, being who adolescents are, may act impulsively and quickly to do something to harm themselves. And so we want themselves and parents or others to be aware. And I guess this is also of concern because it's an antidepressant, so we're usually using it to treat depression and persons who already may be having suicidal symptoms. So the hope, and in the vast majority of cases it's true, the medicine helps to make them better and safer, but the fear is that in a very small number of cases, it could make them worse.
Now, the black box warning indicates that this is especially true, using its words, within the first few months of treatment or when the dose is changed, correct?
Yes,
Now, going back to your earlier testimony, Zoloft was first prescribed to Anna Schroeder in approximately May of 2017, correct?
yes,
And then, with the backdrop of this warning, something happened in the life of Anna Schroeder in June of 2017, correct?
yes.
What is that?
Well, she made a suicide attempt in early June and ended up in the hospital. Not admitted to the hospital, but in the emergency department of the hospital.
And because of the magnitude of the suicide attempt?
Yes,
Do you remember what that consisted of?
she very severely cut her wrist.
And this was after Zoloft was first prescribed to her, correct?
Yes,
What was the dosage of Zoloft that was prescribed to Anna Schroeder in May of 2017?
50 milligrams.
Now, after the suicide attempt, was there a change in the dosage of Zoloft that was administered to Anna Schroeder?
Yes.
And what was that change?
100 milligrams. It was increased.
So after she attempts suicide, after Zoloft is first administered to her, the Zoloft is actually doubled.
Yes. Which is, I'd just like to say, that's not necessarily a bad thing. This is again, what's complex and challenging about Anna or about any other case? We have these medicines, like in other areas of medical care, like in cancer. We have these medicines. They can do miraculous things. They can really help to cure or decrease symptoms of illness, but in some cases they can also make you worse. And so we're always, walking a line and trying to really look very carefully to make sure we're getting the benefits from this and not the adversities from this. So, it's so I guess the person or persons who saw her, we would like to think they were confident that this was the right move to make at that time.
But given the concerns about Zoloft and how it can manifest itself in certain people, what is the additional necessary ingredient to ensure that it's being administered safely?
Right. You should for sure be seen weekly by a psychiatrist to assess what's going on. Is this helping? Is this not helping? What else is interacting in this situation? And that wasn't happening. And that is a grave concern for me.
For the record, Your Honor, I'm concluding the contemporaneous publication of the Exhibit 6. Dr. Wine, we discussed the childhood of Anna Schroeder. We discussed her development through adolescence. We discussed the development of the adolescent brain. We discussed her medical and psychiatric care. And we discussed the final months before this tragedy and the administration of Zoloft contemporaneously. Now let's talk about another ingredient. Did you evaluate the role of Rachel Helm in the life of Anna Schroeder in the months leading up to this tragedy?
Yes.
What is your understanding of what that is?
Well, Rachel and Anna were friends, more than friends. They were, romantically involved, you might say. And they were getting closer and closer over those months. And I think that the worse that Anna was feeling, the more depressed and suicidal she was feeling, the more she was kind of desperately reaching out to Rachel and wanted to be with Rachel. I think that made her feel good to be with Rachel. So this is becoming more and more intense for Anna. But Anna had a problem because Anna's mother, Peggy, didn't want them to be together.
How did all of that play out? And what happened?
Well, I think that it played out really awfully. I mean, I think Anna was getting more and more desperate. She and I think Rachel was desperate. The two of them really wanted to be together. The two of them talked about running away together, and how can we be together? And at some point along the way, in the months prior to the event, they had the idea to kill Anna's mother, Peggy.
You discussed much earlier in your testimony this morning Anna's insecure attachment, intense fear of abandonment, and the role of peer pressure in the development of the adolescent mind. What was the interplay of the influence of Rachel Helm in those components of Anna's psyche?
I think Rachel played a crucial and necessary role in that process of Anna moving along that pathway towards where she committed this act. Rachel helped to nurture the grievance against her mother. You know, your mother can't do it. It's not right thing for your mother to do. Your mother's the problem. We have to get rid of your mother. Rachel, you know, in multiple texts talked about killing, urged Anna to take action to kill her mother. Go ahead and kill her. Then we could be together. That kind of thing. And they even talked about different ways to do it. So this is moving along that pathway that I meant, from grievance to planning to preparation. That was a kind of partnership between the two of them. Make no mistake, Anna pulled the trigger. Anna killed her mother, but it's really hard for me to see Anna going down that pathway without the very active role of Rachel. And that completely fits with our understanding of the adolescent brain, as I said before, where these things are driven very significantly by peer influence. And so you have Rachel, who's Anna's best friend and maybe something more, saying, like, you need to do this, and this is how we can be together. I think that was an incredibly powerful determinant for Anna.
Ultimately, did you speak with Anna about the thought processes that she went through in those final moments leading up to when she pulled the trigger that took the life of Peggy Schroeder?
Yes.
What did you come to understand was that thought process?
Well, I think that was really the most extraordinary moment from, I think, a 6-hour conversation that we had together. And Anna, you know, walked me through what she was thinking and feeling and doing in the moments leading up to pulling the trigger that killed her mother. And what she had, if you recall, she had, I think, put a towel on her mother's head when her mother walked in the house, and then she had the gun. And so Anna is standing there with the gun in front of her mother, who can't see what's going on. And I think Anna at that moment had, like, second thoughts. She thought, like, maybe you know, I don't need to do this. She hasn't seen me do this. I could get out of this. But then she said the most remarkable thing to herself. She said, if I told her what I was going to do, she would hate me. If I told my mom what I'm going to do, she would hate me. She wouldn't let me live in the house. She wouldn't want to talk to me. In other words, Anna's like, oh my God, you know, I'll lose her. I'll lose my mom. And so she pulled the trigger. The solution at that moment was to pull the trigger and to ultimately lose her. This is the kind of thinking process I think you could see in that, one, the peril of abandonment that terrorized Anna, and you can also see the adolescent's tendency in a moment of a charged emotional moment to, instead of withdrawing from risk, to hurl themselves into it. In this case, pull the trigger.
So am I understanding correctly then, that in the convoluted thought process of Anna Schroeder, given everything that led up to that moment, Anna killed her mother because she was so afraid she would otherwise lose her mother?
Yes.
Now, there's absolutely no rationale to that type of thought, but it was Anna's thought.
That was the moment that she found herself in. And I think and it makes sense to me, is as twisted as it is.
Did you have occasion to formulate opinions to a reasonable degree of medical, scientific, and psychiatric certainty as to whether the events of this terrible day for Anna Schroeder are likely to occur?
I'm sorry, the last part of what you said, I kind of tailed off.
Did you formulate an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical, scientific, and psychiatric certainty as to whether the events of that terrible day in the life of Anna Schroeder are likely to recur?
Yes, I have an opinion about that.
What is your opinion to that degree, sir?
I think that they're unlikely to recur for several reasons.
What are those reasons?
So, one, the circumstances of that impossible bind that she found herself in are unique. They're unique to Rachel's presence, Rachel's involvement in her life, Rachel's urging her to the bind that she found herself in between Rachel and her mother, that she couldn't be with Rachel if it wasn't for her mother. So that kind of triangle does not exist anymore, and it's that emotionally charged situation which was the context for her actions, her deadly actions. Also, I think they did the right thing in stopping Zoloft at the time. Sometime after she was incarcerated. Anna had previously had a toxic reaction to Prozac, which is related to Zoloft, and I think there's enough indications to show that we don't need to use Zoloft with Anna. So staying away from that medication in her case, and I just want to be clear that I'm not saying that the medication isn't a safe medication to use in an appropriate way, but in this case, there's no staying away from that would not raise the possibility that could play a role in increasing her risk. Anna also has more cognitive resources than she did when she was 14 years old. She's 19 years old. She graduated high school. She has behaved well in prison, as far as I understand. She hasn't gotten into problems. She's gotten along with people. She's more mature. She also has a really strong relationship with her father and her stepmother. They visit her every week. They talk very frequently. They have frank and open conversations about the things going on in her life and about the future. They're good role models and influence in her life. And of course, she doesn't have an adolescent's brain anymore. She's aged out of that and to a place where one would expect reason and judgment would win over impulsivity and risk-taking.
So in the high-stakes risk assessment of Anna Schroeder, what is your final conclusion?
You mean at present?
Yes.
My conclusion is that Anna does not present any risk to herself or to the public.
Just a few final matters for the record. May I approach you?
You may.
Dr. Wine, did you prepare a narrative report dated March 29, 2018, following your examination of Anna Anna Schroeder?
Yes.
Did you set forth your opinions within that report as well?
Yes.
I've handed you an exhibit which I've caused in our defense exhibit 7 to this proceeding. Is that in fact your narrative report dated March 29, 2018?
Yes.
Move admission into evidence of defense exhibit 7 and contemporaneously move that it be placed under seal.
Mr. Costello?
No objection.
It will be admitted without objection. I'd like to address with the parties later about sealing of all exhibits.
Yes, sir.
So I will reserve that until that conversation.
This time the defense has no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Costello.
Question for the court and counsel. This is probably gonna take a while, my cross-examination. So I don't know when or if the court's planning on a lunch break or not.
Let's go off the record. Come on up, please, counsel. Okay, we're back on the record. I think that this is a good time for us to adjourn before cross starts. We can go to lunch and then come back. My understanding is that there's a motion that the state would like to make before we adjourn. Mr. Costello?
Yes, Your Honor, as there is another case pending of the co-defendant, I am going to make a motion at this time that all exhibits that are entered into evidence during the course of the sentencing hearing be entered under seal.
Mr. Rodas, your response?
With respect to all exhibits except for exhibits 5 and 6, 5 being the curriculum vitae of Dr. Wine, 6 being the black box warning of Zola, I have no objection.
Mr. Costello?
If Dr. Wine's exhibit wants to be out there, I don't think he's involved in the other case, and I don't believe the black box warning is either.
All right, well, I don't have any issue with that, so I will indicate that the state's motion to seal the exhibits as amended by the defense, save for exhibits 5 and 6, will be sealed. That includes exhibits previously admitted and which may be admitted in the sentencing hearing later. So we will now adjourn until 12:30. Everybody please be back on time and be ready to go, and we will start with the cross-examination of Dr. Wine. Dr. Wine, I will remind you that you remain under oath. Please do not discuss your testimony with anyone, and please return promptly so we can begin with your cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, folks.
Can I leave these?